This video we'll be going over IRS Form 1098-C. This is the tax form that you would receive as a donor if you contributed a motor vehicle, a boat, or an airplane to charity. And then this is the tax form that's completed by the donee to affirm the amount of the contribution for the taxpayer that made the donation. So in this video, we'll kind of go through some of the instructions for both donors when it comes to reporting the contributions, but then also some of the instructions for the donees that they have to follow. That way, donors can kind of understand a little bit of the perspective that goes behind this tax form and why certain things are required for taxpayers to be able to claim a deduction for a charitable contribution of said vehicle. So you'll forgive me if I flip-flop back and forth during this form. I will kind of take a moment to point out a couple of things as I see them. So this is the form as it appears on the IRS website. There are 3 copies of this form. I'll scroll through them really briefly and then we'll come back to the top since they're all the same. So copy A is the form that gets filed with Form 1096 for the Internal Revenue Service Center, or for your tax return basically. The copy B actually is for the donor in order to claim a deduction of more than $500 for the specific contribution. This version of the form must be attached to the donor's federal tax return. So one important note here is when we get to box 5A and 5B, those are certifications made by the charitable organization that unless they make those certifications, a donor cannot claim more than a $500 deduction for their contribution. So we'll get into that momentarily. And then in copy C, this is for the donor's records, just because one for the records, one for the tax return. So these are all virtually the same instruction or form. And in the back, you'll even see there are separate instructions for both the donor on how to report the information on the form. There's copy D for the charitable organization. And then on the back, it shows instructions for the donee. So as we go through this form, I'll kind of try to keep this together, but I'll be going back and forth from the perspective of both the donor and the donee. So at the very top of the form, you'll see the field for the donee's name, street address. That's pretty straightforward. So we'll just imagine, we'll pretend that we're filling this out as if we're the donee. So okay, so we'll make this a 2023 date of contribution. Today's date is the 17th of May. So we'll pretend that we're doing this in the calendar year for 2023. So in line 1, date of the contribution. Line 2, odometer mileage. We'll just say 100,000 miles. And we'll use, let's see, 2014. We're just using a car that's sitting in my driveway right now as an example. If I donated my Chevy Suburban that, after a couple of years of my teenage driver driving it around, looks like it's probably not worth much more than $500, but we'll go ahead and pretend that this is the car that we're contributing to St. Acme Church for the benefit of this walkthrough. So the donee's TIN is going to be an employer identification number of some sort. The donor's TIN, we'll just assume that this is my social security number. And then in line 3, we'll put the vehicle identification number, the VIN. If there's some other number that goes here for like the hull identification for a boat or an aircraft ID number, this is the number that you would put in here. So every VIN I've ever seen starts with a 1 and a Z for some reason. And then we'll just put in a really long VIN number. So the donor's name. Line 4A is probably the first kind of litmus test, right, for a donor. So if you're the donor, you'll want to make sure that this box is checked. 4A, what it says is that you gave this vehicle to St. Acme Church, and then they didn't need the vehicle, so they turned around and sold it to an unrelated party, and they were fine with the proceeds. So if the donee makes this certification, then you, as the donor, can make a charitable deduction of more than $500. If for some reason this is not checked, then the underlying assumption is that you can claim up to $500 on your income tax return, and that's it. So obviously this would go on Schedule A. So we'll go down to street address. We'll complete this field. And then we'll put the date of sale as, we'll just say that St. Acme Church found a buyer pretty quickly within a couple of weeks. And I apologize for getting ahead of myself. So there we go. So let's imagine that the gross proceeds of this sale are, well, let's say it's $5,000. All right. So according to the form instructions, if box 4A is checked, then the donor can take a deduction that is equal to the less of either the gross proceeds of the sale or the fair market value of the vehicle on the date of the contribution. So basically, you would need to know what the fair market value of this vehicle was. If for some reason the fair market value of a 2014 Chevy Suburban was only $3,000, then that would be the most that you could take the deduction for, even if this box is checked. And again, if box 4A is not checked, then the most you can take is $500. There are a couple of other checks that need to be performed by the donee in order for the donor to claim a deduction of more than $500. So in box 5A, this is the donee certification that the vehicle will not be transferred for money, other property, or services before the completion of material improvements or significant intervening use. If this box is checked, then you can take a deduction equal to the fair market value on the date of contribution. And again, this would be with the assumption that it wasn't sold, that the donee is actually going to keep it. So in that case, there are no proceeds here. The box in 4A is checked. In that case, then you would need to see that 5A is checked, saying that the vehicle will not be transferred before improvements are completed, and then 5B is a certification that the vehicle is ready to be transferred to a needy individual for significantly below fair market value as part of the donee's charitable purpose. So basically, as long as these two boxes are checked, then the donor can take a deduction up to the fair market value of the vehicle. Finally, in box C, the donee is going to provide a written detailed description of material improvements or any kind of, so if you had a vehicle that needed a new transmission or needed to be reupholstered, my Chevy Suburban looks like it was torn apart by DEA agents, but really it was just a couple of teenagers using the car for a couple of years. So if I gave this to charity and they decided that, they were going to replace the seats, then they would write all of this in here. Now in 6A, 6B, this is asking the donor whether or not goods or services were exchanged or provided in exchange for this vehicle. So if the donee or the charitable organization provided goods or services like, I don't know, $500 worth of, some sort of value that wasn't a de minimis value. So going to a church and receiving services, religious services that are in accordance with their religious mission, that would not be considered a service in exchange for the vehicle. But if I gave this to some sort of not-for-profit and they gave me tickets to a fundraiser that normally they charge $500 to go to, then I would have to annotate, they would have to annotate, yes, you did provide goods or services in exchange for that vehicle. And then you would have to list the dollar amount, because that is the amount that you would have to reduce the value of the charitable contribution. So if for some reason the donee organization selected yes, and they stated that the $1,000 of goods and services were provided, and it turns out that they actually did sell the vehicle, so let's say it's $5,000, then my charitable deduction would be limited to $5,000 minus $1,000 or $4,000. So, and then in line C, you would describe goods and services. Again, if this box is checked, then the goods and services are solely intangible religious benefits, things like counseling or guided prayer. Those wouldn't really, detract from the value. And the IRS actually defines an intangible religious benefit as a benefit that's generally not sold in a commercial transaction. So, for example, admission to a religious ceremony, like you can't, or the IRS will not negate the value of the contribution simply because the church decided to turn around and perform a baptism or a communion or something like that. So, and then finally, box 7 is a very important box to note, because if this box is checked, then the donor cannot claim a deduction of more than $500. So actually, the total deduction would be the smaller of either $500 or the fair market value on the date of the contribution. So that's how you would expect to see the form as the donor. There are a couple of instructions for the donee. So the donee is required to furnish, so if we're completing copy A for the Internal Revenue Service Center, the donee files that with IRS Form 1096, which is a transmittal statement, because this form has to be accompanied by a transmittal. So basically a summary sheet of certain tax forms that cannot be submitted electronically. This would be faxed or mailed to the IRS Service Center, and basically it would be attached. 1096 is attached to all of the documents that accompany it, has a summary of how many of which type of documents. That's for the church's issue to work through. However, the church would be required to provide the donor both copy B, which is the value, the copy for the tax return, and then copy C, which is for the records, within 30 days after the date of sale if box 4A is checked, or after 30 days of the date of contribution if 5A or 5B are checked. So, so within 30 days, not necessarily the end of the tax year, although if you make your contribution towards the end of the tax year, you may have to just adjust your expectations. So again, you should be on the lookout for within 30 days of either your donation or your date of sale. So for donors, keep that in mind. After 30 days of your contribution, go back and ask whether or not you'll be getting a Form 1098-C, or whether they're going to sell your donation, and then then you can expect your proceeds or your receipt in the form of your Form 1098 within 30 days after the sale. So if the box is checked for line 7, then the donee will not file copy A with the IRS. The donor should not expect to receive copy B. Those are actually in the form instructions. The donor can receive copy C for their records, but if box 7 is checked, that means that the donor can claim up to $500. They don't need to have a copy of 1098-C to accompany their tax return to claim that deduction, although they should have a copy of copy C for their records in case of audit. And so, and then let's see, those are the primary instructions for the donee. And I'm just double checking through the form instructions to see if there's any additional guidance for donors. So donors must attach copy B of this form to take a deduction of more than $500. If you e-file a tax return, then you must attach a copy of this form to IRS Form 8453, which is an individual tax transmittal document. So we talked about IRS Form 1096. That's a transmittal document that your charitable organization would use. However, the 8453 is a transmittal document for individual taxpayers, and that's for certain forms that cannot be filed electronically. So if that's your situation, then you would have to submit it separate from your tax return. So that is all that we have for this tax form. And again, for donors, there are certain things that you would look for to make sure that you take the full value of your deduction. For donees, there are certain things that a donee or a charitable organization would need to provide that donor to help enable that person to make their full deduction on their tax return. So we have written a complete article on this, you can go to our website and find it at teachmepersonalfinance.com. Simply type in IRS Form 1098-C and our article should appear. If you like our articles, please subscribe to our newsletter. And if you like our YouTube videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And as always, if you have any questions or comments or concerns, please let us know in the comments section, or you can send me an email. Thank you very much and have a great day.